We will discuss now differences among language learner under basic language cognition versus higher language cognition. We have already discussed basic language cognition is common to all first language learners, and higher language cognition, which is also known as extended language cognition, is only specific to catering to the differences of language learners. According to Helstein, the explanation of native speakers' differences in higher language cognition, which is extended language cognition, should probably be found in, number one, cognitive abilities in other than purely linguistic domains. So, those cognitive activities which are not only confined to the linguistic domains, the language or linguistic units of language, that's not the concern only. For example, executive control, they include executive control, which is the overall dominating control, reasoning, in interpreting or solving problems, working memory in terms of short-term and long-term memory capacity, encyclopedic knowledge of the world, the huge, humongous information, in combination with environmental factors, such as exposure to oral and written language at home, in school, and elsewhere. So, here when we include environmental factor, we see that it is not only confined to the cognitive abilities which are purely linguistic based. All these environmental factors are out of the domain of linguistic framework. In BLC, HLC theory, variability is reduced to the domain of HLC. So in terms of differences, in terms of variation, we see that all these things happens in higher language cognition and not BLC, which is the basic, because BLC is common and you do not find differences there. Differences are observed in HLC. While BLC represents the language cognition common to all, despite differences in social background and personal attribution. So basically, despite one has social background differences or personal traits which are different, still the basic language cognition is common among all the first language learners. Wells, in his research, 1986, claimed the following factors producing variability in first language development, and they are social background, personal attributes such as gender, intelligence, personality, and learning style. So these are the personal traits. Situation, which are the settings or social in context, and status of the participants in terms of belonging to a higher class or low class, or the very status of the participants, and the style of interaction. Is it interpersonal, formal, intrapersonal, or child hearing methods? So these are the factors which were introduced by Wells in terms of understanding of the L1 differences. We have other researches also which focus on individual differences in first language development. Let's try to understand them. Bates, Dale, and Hall says that there is enormous, huge variability in rate of development in terms of the differences. And they believe that if we want to understand the mechanism underlying normal language development, we need to understand how much variation there is in normal L1 development, and thus where the boundaries are between normal and non-normal development. So emphasis is that if you really want to understand the mechanism which basically you find underlying the normal language development, we have to understand the differences. We have to see how much differences and variations there are in normal language development, and also determine the boundaries between what is normal and what is non-normal. They also believe that there is a strong association between lexical and grammatical development. So words and the grammatical structure, there is a close association that they contribute or supplement each other in terms of development. And especially that also towards a period which is from 16 to 30 months of the age. So that is how the differences can be looked at in that specified time, and how the mechanism works. The other research elements believe that while some variation is determined by differences in input, other variations appear to reflect genetic causes, including differences in the cognitive abilities. So, in terms of the external input, differences can be observed, but then you have the genetic causes, and that can affect your cognitive abilities, your mental processes, or cognitive processes. Hoff points out the effect of parents' socioeconomic status, that some effect of childhood environment related to socioeconomic status may have enduring effect on language proficiency. So socioeconomic status of parents can, yes, contribute in the development process. For example, the input that has come from a low family background or an input that is there from a high status family background does have the enduring effects on language proficiency. The other researchers, Barman, Nippold, Pekulak, or Neville, feel that large increase in vocabulary, including metaphors, idioms, and proverbs, and development at a more modest pace in syntax, which is sentence structure, pragmatic, and narrative skills during the year of primary and secondary education. So the differences on the basis of these is there, and you can observe them at primary and secondary education level. We saw the differences in terms of first language, and now we will see individual differences in outcomes of second language acquisition. Not all second language learners are equally successful in acquiring the second language. So that is an undisputed fact that not all learners acquire successfully the second language process. There are differences. The trivial causes of some differences may be vast differences in exposure to the target language. So some of the minor differences or the causes for the differences can be vast input or vast exposure to the target language, or vast differences in motivation to acquire. When we say vast differences in terms of exposure, some people can have a very extensive or very substantial exposure to the target language in terms of acquiring second language. Some can have a very limited, just within the classroom. Others can have exposures having or living in the target language situation. So the differences varies differences vary according to the quantity of the exposure. And then the differences of motivation, that how a first language learner motivated, how he or she is. In terms of the motivation, if he or she is motivated, then there's going to be a fast and effective learning. If he or she is demotivated, yes, it does affect the learning process or the acquisition process. So differences on the basis of the exposure to the target language and the motivation and demotivation level. Non-trivial or some of the major causes can be the quality of second language input under the same quantity of the input. So the quality, same quantity is given, but under that quantity, the quality varies in terms of the exposure. Empirical investigation include the impact of instructional factors, socioeconomic factors, and individual factors on second language acquisition. So how that information is imparted or language in terms of education, socioeconomic factors or individual personality traits, they do play an important part in the determining of the differences among L2 learners. To conclude, Hulstein has explained the empirical research on first language learners' individual differences in the proficiency of understanding and speaking their first language and social background and personal attributes and individual differences in the outcome of second language acquisition.